family issues or anything like that. And that is really the true measure of our thankfulness. If you remember the story of Job, if you read the actual story of Job in his memoirs, the moments when the devil would come to him and would say to him, your family has been destroyed, or your cattle has been destroyed, or something terrible has happened to you. Every single one of those moments, the first thing he says when he hears those is, the Lord gives and the Lord takes away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. So that was his response, his natural response to a completely, like the worst disaster you can imagine happening to a person. His family completely being taken away, everything that he owns being destroyed. At one point, even his physical health was completely gone. But his response was always, first and foremost, give thanks. And it gets very difficult, but if you remember you guys have all heard this verse. There's a verse by St. Paul in the Epistle to the Romans, and it says, chapter 8, it says, and we know that all things work together for good to those who love God, to those who are called according to his purpose. And you've all heard this a million times. And it's a very nice verse, because when you break it down, all it says is everything in your life, everything, not some things, not just the good things, everything in your life is working together for good to those who love God. So everything in our lives, whether it be good or bad, whether it's the worst thing that could ever happen or the most amazing moment ever, it is working for good to those who love God. And we often hear people say, you know, something like this happened or something like that happened, and oh, it's just a coincidence, and oh, that was such a happy coincidence. I'm so happy that this happened to me. And it's very interesting because the word coincidence comes from a Greek word, and the Greek word is synkyria. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right. Synkyria. And the word synkyria actually means, the word syn means together with, and the word kyria means God's supreme authority. So the word literally means together with God's supreme authority. So every single time we hear the word coincidence, there's no such thing as coincidence. It is God's supreme plan. It's all part of his plan. Every single moment that we have that we say, oh, this is coincidental. No, there's no such thing as coincidence for us Christians. It's a matter of whether or not we choose to see God working through it. And we choose to see that as working for good for us. So that's the first way. Very simple, very, very straightforward. So the second way would be to live a life in silence. And I think someone spoke about this a couple of weeks ago. I think it was Peter who spoke about it a little bit as well. And this is the golden, most important thing, tried and proven place to feel God. A place of solitude, contemplation. In order to hear God's voice, we must first learn to stop speaking, get away from the noise, and be able to listen. When Elijah was told to go to the mountain in 1 Kings chapter 19, verse 11 to 12, he said there was a voice that told him, if you want to speak to God, go to the top of the mountain. So he went to the top of the mountain, and at the top of the mountain, he sat there and waited for the voice of God. And the first thing that happened was there was a loud a hurricane that came past, or a loud wind. And then he looked and God wasn't there. And then he heard that there was an earthquake, and he looked and God wasn't there. And then there was a fire, a very great fire that came past, and he looked and God wasn't there. And then after all of that had passed, in the silence, he heard the voice of God. And it was a small, soft voice. We know, like, when we look around at all the saints that we have in our church, a lot of them chose that life. So Saint Anthony, the father of all the monastic father of all the monks, he fled to the wilderness to escape the noise of the city and the people. And many monks, as we know, followed in his footsteps. We have Pope Krolos, the patriarch, who was responsible for the modern reformation of our church. So if you guys know the backstory of Pope Krolos, the church was a mess before he came along and he was made patriarch. And when he became patriarch, in the 12 years that he was patriarch, the church was completely transformed into, like what we see it today. Just everyone was all of a sudden just flicked the switch, and everyone became faithful, and like everyone was attending church. And this didn't happen overnight. And we refer to him as the silent patriarch. He's not referred to as the patriarch of great talks, or the patriarch of amazing sermons, or the patriarch of wise words. He's referred to as the silent patriarch, because he always preferred to keep silent in prayer, to always prefer to not speak but pray and bless people through his prayers. There's a saying that goes, from one of the church fathers, that goes, "I've often regretted what I have said, but I have never regretted being silent." And there's another church father who, when he was speaking to a group of people, says to them that he was completely silent. They went to visit him and he was completely silent. And they said, "Father, why don't you speak to us?" And he says to them, "If you are not edified by my silence, how will you be edified by my speech?" There's another saying that says, "Preach the gospel and when necessary, use words." So I can go on and on about sayings about silence, but I'll stop there. But spending time in silence helps us reflect, helps us meditate, slows us down so we can listen to the voice of God. And I think it's very important as we get back into the rush of things, to just find those moments of silence wherever we can get them, to just contemplate and just sort of meditate and still our spirits so that we can hear the voice of God speaking to us. In Proverbs 17, it says, "He who has knowledge spares his words, and a man of understanding is of a calm spirit. Even a fool is counted wise when he holds his peace. When he shuts his lips, he is considered perceptive." So that's another way, the second way that we have. You guys all following? Should I slow down? Yeah. Keep going. Okay. So, nearly done. So the third, and I think this is an important one, but we always overlook this, but the early church and in the Bible a lot, they focus on this a lot, living a life of remembrance. And that means placing reminders of God throughout our day, in every way that we have. So if you look at all the Jewish names, the names that the Jews gave to their children, a lot of them are very, very significant names. They signify things. So the name Joshua means God is deliverance. And it was given to Joshua as a reminder to the Jews that of how God had delivered them out of Egypt. So they would look at Joshua and they would remember Joshua means deliverance. God has delivered us from Egypt. Joseph, when he named his two sons, he named them Manasseh, meaning God has made me forget my problems and my father's house, and Ephraim, meaning God has made me fruitful. The name Timothy, wherever he's gone, means honoring of God. The name John, which was given to John the Baptist first by Elizabeth and Zacharias, means graced by God. And it was to signify how they were of old age, yet they received the present that was John. So in the Old Testament, that was a very big thing. They used to set reminders, and as simple as I will just put a name, attach it to my child so that I can remember how God has blessed them. And like you guys can all look around, a lot of your names will be around saints, right? And that they are set as reminders. And everyone has their own form of reminder. For some, it was a name, a person, a thing. A lot of desert fathers kept diaries and had places they would visit, like Pope Carlos had the mill. Abuna will always tell you the story of the water tank that he has outside, that every time he walks past, he sees it and he remembers how he was blessed with it. And every single one of us has a way that God has blessed us in our lives, whether it is big or small, and it is always good to keep that as a reminder throughout our day. I was listening to a sermon, and there was a story of a lady who was sitting her examination for like a registration exam, and it was an oral registration exam. And this examiner that she sat with was very rude and mean to her, and she came out and she said, like, 100% I'm going to fail this exam. He was just giving me attitude, and I'm definitely not going to pass this. So she spent the next couple of days in prayer, praying that she would pass this exam, just like really pleading and crying to God. And then one night she had a vision that a priest that she'd never seen before came up to her and said, "Don't worry, this examiner is not going to be there. He'll leave, and you're going to pass the exam." And so a few days later, she got an email saying the examiner was on leave, so they were taking longer to pass her exam. And then a few days after that, she got her exam results and she passed the exam. So out of joy, she ran to the church and she wanted to thank God and the priest, but she'd never seen the priest before. So she ran into the church to thank God and pray. And while she was at the church thanking God, she received, you know those little icons that they pass out, like sometimes we pass out at the end of the Mass? So she received one of those little icons and she grabbed it. And it was Abuna Abdul Masih al-Manahri. Do you know, if you guys know him? Yeah, yeah. And so she looked at the picture and she went, that's the priest. That's the priest that appeared to me in my dream. And so from then onwards, she kept that picture in her wallet. And that was her reminder. Every single time she would open her wallet, she would see that picture and she'd remember how her qualifications were given to her by God. So everyone has their own reminder or own way to set a reminder to remember how God has blessed their life, whether it is big or small. Nowadays, we have our phones, and our phones can always give us reminders, whether it's a contemplation, a Bible verse, or even just a simple reminder to get up and pray. These are simple things that, if we have throughout the day, they will help us to remember to sort of place us in the presence of God on a regular basis. And the last one I had was living a life of compassion for others. And this comes down to love and its 1,000,001 attributes. The attribute we use to describe God, the first fruit of the Holy Spirit, the greatest requirement of holiness, and the typical Sunday school answer that everyone gives. God is love. As St. Paul tells us, love will cover a multitude of sins. And we always remember how Christ tells us, inasmuch as you did it to the least of my brethren, you did it unto me. So everything that we do to those around us, the greatest to the least, we are doing it to Christ. And we often make the mistake and think that God only works in us Christians. We often think that just because we are Christian, that God will only work for us. But that's not the case. Like I was saying before, the sun shines on everyone. Yeah? We are just called to be different, and we are just able to see the sun's rays. We are able to see the working of God within everyone. He is before all things, and in him all things consist, as St. Paul says in Colossians. And so it is our requirement as Christians, being called to be different, to be able to show compassion and love to those people around us, whether it be the people we see at uni, the people we work with, our families, all those people that are close to us. Pope Shenouda tells us, if you have nothing to give people, give them a warm smile and a kind word. Give them love, give them tenderness, give them a word of encouragement. Give them your heart. If you guys know the story of Saint Bishoy, the one who washed the feet of Christ, it's a very nice story. I'm sure all of you guys know it. It's the story of how he carried a man up the mountain. So he was very much known for his compassion and love to all the people around. And the story goes that when he was in his older days, he prayed to God and said, God, I want to see you in like your physical presence. And God told him, and after like many, many days and months of praying, eventually God told him, okay, I will appear to you on this mountain on this set day. So he told all the monks in the monastery that he was in the monastery of Shahid, and he said to them all, God will appear on this day on this mountain. So let's all go to that mountain on that day. So on that day, they all got ready to go to the top of the mountain, to climb the mountain and search for God, search for Christ. And so they all got ready and they went up to the mountain, and Saint Bishoy was a little bit older, so he was a little bit slower than all the other monks. So all the other monks rushed up the mountain, and he was a little bit slower going up the mountain. And as he was going up, he saw this elderly man who was like a lot weaker, and like he looked like he was famished, like he hadn't eaten in a very long time, and he was just sitting on the side. And he asked that elderly man, where are you going? And all the other monks just ignored him. They just ran up the mountain. They want to see Christ. They don't care about anyone else. And he went up to him and he said, where are you going? He said, I'm going to the mountain as well. So he said, okay, I'll take you with me. So he took that elderly man and he put him on his back and he started carrying him up the mountain. And as he carried him up the mountain, he found that the elderly man was getting heavier. And he was getting heavier and heavier and heavier and heavier until he couldn't carry him anymore. So he put him down and he looked, and that elderly man suddenly transformed, and he told him, he looked like his face was shining. And so he realized that this was actually Christ himself, that was the appearance of Christ. So he said to him, my Lord, heaven is too small for you and earth Earth rumbles at your glory. How can a sinner like me carry you? And then Christ disappeared. And so then he went and told the other monks, Christ appeared, I carried him up the mountain. And then when the other monks realized that this was Christ, they were very disappointed that they didn't get the opportunity to see him. There's another story of Saint Bishoy, how one day he saw an elderly man or a stranger walking outside his cell during the day, and he looked like he was like a sort of worn down man. So he grabbed the man and he told him, come inside, I'm gonna like feed you and look after you. So he brought the man inside into his cell, and he got a water basin and filled it up with water and put it under his feet and started washing his feet. And as he started washing his feet, he heard a voice saying, my chosen Bishoy, you are an honorable man. And then he looked up, and once again, he was washing the feet of Christ. So these two instances where he just showed compassion to like just a bystander, a random stranger that no one would have even looked twice at. He had been granted the ability to see Christ in the flesh, and as a result, his body, Christ told him, your body will not see corruption, and his body was never found. So I know it's easier said than done, but it's very important way that we can place ourselves in the presence of Christ on a regular basis. Just being able to show compassion to everyone around us, just the people that we see at work, at uni, the people we interact with. And Christ places more requirement on us as Christians when he says to us, love your enemy. In Matthew chapter 5, you have heard that it is said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies, bless those who curse you, do good to those who hate you, and pray for those who spitefully use you and persecute you, that you may be sons of your Father in heaven, for he makes his sun rise on the evil and on the good, and sends rain on the just and on the unjust. For if you love those who love you, what reward have you? Do not even the tax collectors do the same? And if you greet your brethren only, what do you do more than others? Do not even the tax collectors do the same? Therefore you shall be perfect, just as your Father in heaven is perfect. It's very harsh words, because it says, if you love those who love you, so if you just stick to the people around you and say, I'm just going to love the people who are close to me and the people who show me love, what reward have you? What makes... He literally says, do not even the tax collectors do the same? Don't we look at everyone else and we say that they all do the same thing? And if we greet only the people around us, what are we doing more than others? What makes us Christians? What makes me say that I am a son of God? Do not even the tax collectors do the same, he says. And notice how he says his son, once again, to emphasize that idea that the sun shines on everyone. There's I think I've told this story before, but I'm going to say it again. There's a story of Pope Carlos writing when he became patriarch. Okay, this is the last story. There's a story of Pope Carlos when he became patriarch. And the story goes that because Pope Carlos was the way he would ordain bishops was very out of the ordinary. Because he was led by the Spirit. So he was told, like, the Holy Spirit would guide him in how he would ordain bishops. So he would grab bishops and put them in weird spots. Like, he would grab a bishop from Alexandria and tell him, go serve in, like, lower parts of Egypt. And it didn't make sense to anyone. So there was a lot of newspapers out there that were speaking about him, and one of them in particular that was speaking a lot about how he was corrupt, because the Pope before him was very corrupt. So they were saying that he was corrupt. He was receiving bribes, and that's why he was moving the bishops around like that. That he would take money, and that he would do things just because people had given him money or because people had given him presents or things like that. And this paper was open for many, many, many years. And every single time when he was asked about it, he would never say anything bad about it. He would just be like, he had no comment at all. He would just avoid talking about it. And then one day, this is written from that book, The Silent Patriarch. The story is written from there. And it's written from the perspective of the bishop. The bishop that's serving with him receives a phone call, and the phone call is someone telling him that newspaper has closed down. It's gone bankrupt and it can no longer operate, so it's closed down. So he goes to tell the Pope Carlos. He thinks he's going to be over the moon. You know, these people who are talking so much or saying so many terrible things about you, their newspaper had to close down. And he thought, like, his response would be, oh, that's right, God, like, he protects the righteous. He protects those who love him. So he goes with this story, and he goes and tells him, good news, Baba, the patriarch has, the newspaper has closed down. It's no longer functioning. And what he got in response was this outpour of sadness. He immediately got really upset. And he said to him, why? Sayyidina, why are you upset? Like, this newspaper was talking about your corruption. They were saying things that were blasphemous against you, and it was very, very detrimental. And he said, no, but what about the people? What about the people? What about their jobs? What about their families? What are they going to do? How are they going to provide for their families and provide for themselves? And so he immediately got on the phone and started calling around to try and find jobs for these people. Because to him, he didn't see a group of people that were like being malicious and attacking him. He saw a group of people that were doing their jobs, that were there to make money for their families. So he saw beyond any sins that they were doing, and he saw the beauty that was underneath it, the individual that was underneath it, and he had compassion for them. St. Paul tells us, pursue peace with all peoples and holiness, without which no one will see the Lord. So those were my little tidbit points about how to be in the presence of God on a regular basis, live a life of appreciation, live a life of silence, live a life of remembrance, and live a life of compassion. And I think in terms of like what you guys had up there, I think it really comes down to that when we are thankful, then we will be content, and our prayers will be less directed towards what we want and rather towards how we are thankful for what we've been given. And then, just like that Sunday school kid who just got up and said, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, we won't feel our prayers aren't being answered as much as we just want to say thanks. When we practice silence, then we will be able to find peace on a daily basis. When we remember God's work in every little thing, then we will feel our life as being blessed. If we're able to sit there and say, God has done this and God has done that for me, then every single thing is a blessing. And when we show love to those around you, then when we show love to those around us, then we will feel God's love towards us. And that's all I have. Glory be to God. I'm sorry, I didn't answer every single one on the Slido, but if you have any further questions, Abuna is still around and he can answer them. So thank you guys. Do you have any questions for Abuna? Not for me. Do you have any announcements?
Does anyone have any questions? No? Yes? Maybe? No? Once? Twice? Alright, sounds good. Thanks very much, Bassem. I'm sure everybody learnt a lot. I saw John was in admiration of your talk, just like everybody else. Okay, so I want you guys to keep your eyes